Begin. Hey everybody, welcome to the last slot, other than the panel, the last slot of sessions at the show. Thanks everybody for sticking around and coming to this one. Hope you had a great dev intersection and that you learned a lot, and that you'll learn a lot in this session as well. My name is Robert Green. I'm a program manager in the evangelism group at Microsoft, that's DX. I'm also the host of a Channel 9 show called Visual Studio Toolbox. Anybody watch that? Excellent, a couple. Anybody going to start watching it after this? Yes, excellent. Speaking of Channel 9, we are actually live streaming this on Channel 9, which I think I should be able to see. But anyway, we're being recorded for posterity, so we'll all be on our best behavior. And you'll laugh uproariously at all of my jokes, and you'll stand up and applaud afterwards and all that, right? Excellent. Thank you. Any questions on this stuff, feel free to email me, rogreen@microsoft.com. There's my Twitter handle. This talk is on code-focused development with Visual Studio 2015. It's basically things that we put into the product to make your lives easier and better as developers. And we could take the 5 out and put a 3 in there and give the same talk. We could take the 3 out and put a 2 in there. Every version of Visual Studio improves developer productivity and adds a bunch of new features. We could take the 5 out and put whatever the next version is going to be, codenamed DEV15. There's a new one around the corner. It's always about better tooling to make you a better developer. Visual Studio 2015 shipped last July. Which to those of us at Microsoft seems like an awful long time ago. I always joke that there's a total mismatch between the folks at Microsoft working on Visual Studio and the customers, because as far as we're concerned, the current version that we're working on is the next version of Visual Studio, and the version that you think is the current version to us is the previous version. So 2015 to you is the current version, but to us it's the previous version. 2013 to you is the previous version. To us it's ancient history, because that was 2 versions ago. And the version that we're working on now, and will be shipping relatively soon, is for us the current version, and to you is the next version. And then the version after that, which we're already designing, to us that's the next version, to you that's science fiction. So there's always this mismatch, which is kind of interesting to negotiate. So, given that 2015's been out for now quite some time, I was going to retire this talk because I figured, oh, we've seen everything that's in there and people are going to get bored of this, and I've given this talk several times. But I kept giving it because, you know, we submit sessions to these conferences months in advance. And the last couple times I gave this talk, people saw a bunch of stuff they didn't know, and I got bored with a couple of the examples, so I added some new things to it, and I learned a few things that I didn't know. So, long and short, there's never any shortage of things that are in the product that you may not be familiar with or haven't really played around with. So the whole purpose of this talk is to go over a bunch of them, and hopefully you'll see several things that you either didn't know were in there or you hadn't started using, and therefore become more productive. The main reference is the GitHub repo. I'm working off a demo script. I love working off demo scripts. So all of the demos I'm going to show and the demo script and a bunch of things that actually aren't in the talk but are still in the demo script and the code, it's all up on GitHub. So take a look at that. And again, if you have any questions on this stuff, just let me know. I've got a bunch of slides in here just to kind of level set, but I'm not going to go through any of them, and I'm now done with slides. As soon as you finish taking a picture of that, cool. Let's dispense with slides and head right into the product. Okay. So here's Visual Studio 2015. We're just going to look at a bunch of things that make us better developers. I'm going to start off in the upper right-hand corner. And notice that it says Robert, and it shows my picture. You can log into Visual Studio or sign into Visual Studio. How many people sign into Visual Studio today? Okay, cool. If you sign into Visual Studio, a couple things happen. One of which it's good for us because you'll send us some telemetry that tells us what you're doing. Now, don't worry, it's totally anonymous. We don't know who you are, but we know what types of projects you open. We might know what types of references you call. We know if you're doing Xamarin or doing .NET Core, connecting to Azure. We know what features of the product you're using. So that gives us a lot of insights into what people are doing and might hopefully give us some insights into areas that people are having troubles with. But what it also gives you the ability to do, besides see your picture in Visual Studio, which is cool, is you log in and things like settings will roam, and it also makes it easier for Visual Studio to keep track of, is this thing still on? Yes? I lost my mic. Now it's back on? Okay. I noticed that the volume seemed to go down. Can you guys hear me in the back? All right, cool. One of the things that the benefits of logging in is that it helps you keep track of various accounts you have, like your Visual Studio Team Services account or your Azure accounts. Now, many people, myself included, have multiple accounts. So I have an Azure account and a Visual Studio Team Services account using my Microsoft account, my personal rgreen 2005 at MSN account. But I also have accounts, particularly Azure accounts, under my work address, rogreen@microsoft.com. So if I'm going to connect to Azure, the first question is, well, am I connecting to Azure as the Robert Green that works at Microsoft or the Robert Green that just has his kind of generic Microsoft account? And I'll have to switch back and forth between those. And prior to 2015, you had to exit the product, come back in, and sign in as this other persona, which is a giant pain. But now what you can do is you can add an account. So you can actually come into all accounts and let's see what accounts I have. So I can add rogreen@microsoft.com, assuming I can type. And that's going to take me to my organization sign-in page, which is going to ask for a PIN. We have two-factor authentication all over the place. Okay, and then under all accounts, once that finishes, okay, good, should show both accounts. So now, assuming that worked, what that gives me the ability to do, now if I'm going to go into this web application, for example, and I'm going to publish it on Azure, then it's going to, is the web working here? There's been a lot of internet problems that people have been having. Okay, there we go. So now I can decide whether I want to use the Azure accounts associated with my Microsoft account or the Azure accounts associated with my work account. So it makes it much more convenient for me to bounce back and forth without having to exit the product while I'm in the middle of something, come back in and sign in as somebody else. So I just sign in as me, and then I've associated each of these accounts with myself. Okay? Now, I'm not one of these people that pauses for dramatic effect, but I will say that if you do see something you like, feel free to shout, yell, clap, whatever. It's good feedback for us to know what features you like. Okay. All right, so here we are in Visual Studio, and I'm on a Surface Pro 3, which I love as a machine. Unfortunately, it only has 8 gig of RAM, and that kind of gets in my way every now and then, so I'm thinking of upgrading to something that has 16 gigs. Just not sure what to get yet. But, you know, the screen's, you know, decent size, but it's not a big monitor, right? So sometimes I want the Solution Explorer open because I'm working with the Solution Explorer. Sometimes I want the Server Explorer up. Sometimes, you know, I might want that closed. So it kind of depends on what monitor I'm on, how I want my screen laid out. So let's say that right now, I just want to be able to look at code. So I want this to go away. I want the Server Explorer to be minimized. I just want maximum code. But sometimes, you know, if I'm at work and I've got my big monitor, I want this up like that, and I want the error list up because I've got a giant monitor. So I want that, and then, you know, things in between. Wouldn't it be nice if I could have Visual Studio remember these things? And quick tip, anytime during this talk when I say, wouldn't it be nice if, I'm about to show you something. Right? It's a dead giveaway. Okay, so I'm going to call this, I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to say Save Window Layout, and I'm going to call this Surface. Okay? And then when this is unpinned, I'm going to save this as code. And then when this is out like this, and this is out like this, I'm going to save this as work. And then I want this a little bit narrower and this a little bit narrower because my home monitor is not quite as big as my work monitor. I'm going to call that home. And now, if I go to Apply Windows Layout, all of these things are there with keyboard shortcuts, which I guess I'd probably print that out, which is my way of remembering what the keyboard shortcuts are. I'm not one of these people that's really good with keyboard shortcuts. There's a handful of them I know, like Control-Shift-B, Control-Shift-N, Control-Shift-O. I think that's about it. There might be a couple others. But after I print this out and tack it up on my wall, Control-Alt-2 is Surface. Control-Alt-3 we said was code. Control-Alt-4 was work. Control-Alt-5 was home. So you can manage those. You can delete the ones you don't need anymore. So at home, I got a big new monitor, and I don't need that one anymore. You can reset them. And if you've signed in, I'm pretty sure that those will roam with you. That's one of the settings that roam. So if you go home or go somewhere else and sign in, then you'll get those. So let's go back to Surface, Control-Alt-2. OK. So now let's write some code. Does that font look good enough? Yeah. All right, so this is an MVC application. I'm going to show an MVC app. I've got a, yes, question. They're in 2015. And wait, when were they introduced? That's a good question. Huh. There are a couple of things that I'm going to do in this talk that may have been introduced previously. I think those were new in 15. Yes, so they meant to go forward, absolutely, yeah. Stuff rarely gets taken out. One more question, yes? Is it the same in debugger mode? Probably, although I haven't really tried that. I'm not sure exactly how much of the Windows layouts it keeps track of. I don't know if it's a design time or a runtime only thing, but I guess we could easily find out. Okay, so I've got an MVC app here. I'm going to bounce back and forth between an MVC app and a WPF app because most of the stuff I'm showing is not dependent on the type of project you're working on. So here's just an MVC app that I created from scratch. Notice that some of the usings are grayed out. And notice also that there is this light bulb that appears right here. So one of the things we did leading up to 2015 was completely rewrite the compilers. This is formerly known as the .NET compiler platform, and unofficially codenamed known as Roslyn. So we rewrote the compilers. The C# compiler is now rewritten in C#, the VB compiler rewritten in VB. And what that gives us is the ability to do some live code analysis so that as you're typing code, the IDE is watching you and is able to give you tips on how to write better code. So if we hover over this and expand it, it says you can remove unnecessary usings, and then it shows me which usings are unnecessary. And these are the ones that are grayed out. Now, yes, it's always been true that I could right-click, organize usings, and remove unnecessary usings. So we haven't added to the product the ability to remove unnecessary usings, although we did add it for VB in 2015. But what we've added is the fact that the compiler is watching you and is actually acting as an assistant. So here I'm told immediately that there are things I can do, remove unnecessary usings, I can preview it, I can do it in this document, in this project for the entire solution, and get rid of all those unnecessary usings, and now they're gone. Of course, if I said, oh, I didn't mean to do that, Control-Z will get them all back. And then notice that they went gray and the light bulb popped up, right? So this light bulb will pop up occasionally when you're doing things. So let's see another couple examples. Let's go to a particular method. I want to go to the external login method. Okay, and notice that right now there's no light bulb here because there's nothing immediately wrong with this code. There's all kinds of things I could do with this code, of course. There are all kinds of refactorings I could do, but there's nothing that jumps out at us as something that you might want to think about. So I like to think of the .NET compiler, this Roslyn and the light bulbs is kind of my assistant who's sitting there watching me. And if you think about it, if it's constantly tapping me on the shoulder, oh, you can do something different, you can do something different, that would be really annoying. And if it never volunteered anything and it only responded to questions, that would also be useless. So somewhere in the middle is kind of the sweet spot, which will adjust from version of the product to version of the product as we kind of figure out what people would prefer. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to highlight this entire second parameter, and then I'm going to press Control Dot, and now this pops up with some tips, some things I can do. I can introduce a local for this. I can introduce a local for all occurrences of this. I can extract a method. So let's introduce a local for this. And then it creates the local and it calls it V. I'm going to call it V2. Second time I've done the demo. A little joke there. Oop. I called it V. I escaped. I didn't press apply. Okay, so that's a perfect example of there are things you could do that you can ask for, but that light bulb doesn't show up until I'm actually asking for it. Okay, we do the same thing here. External login callback, Control Dot. I can introduce a constant for this, a local constant, constant for all occurrences. So let's introduce a constant, and I'm going to call it external login callback constant, because my rule of thumb is constant names should always be longer than the thing they stand for. It's just my rule of thumb. Okay, so now I've introduced the constant for that. And of course, what I could do is, extract this as a method, Control Dot, extract it as a method. So there's a bunch of stuff in there. Now, it'll ask, oh, so does that mean Visual Studio now does all the things ReSharper can do? Are you taking everything in ReSharper and putting it in here? And the answer is always of course not. ReSharper will continue to do all kinds of things that Visual Studio doesn't. Every release of Visual Studio, we might add a couple things that you've seen in ReSharper and other editors like that, but we're never going to just take all of that functionality and put it into Visual Studio. Okay, so if there are things you particularly want to see, user voice is the best way to make the recommendation. Although I got to be perfectly honest, it's a little too late for the next version of Visual Studio, which is codenamed Dev15 or Visual Studio 15, which is coming out soon. But certainly things that you could get in there for future updates or the next version after that, which would be, what, Visual Studio 16 for you. Okay, all right. Now, let's say I want to, I've got this variable here called provider, and I Control R, which brings up the inline rename. No, actually, and I want to call it, let's do this one. I've got this return URL, and I want to rename that. I want to call it provider. okay? Big warning lights, because the compiler has detected that I now have unresolvable conflicts. I already have a variable called provider, and it shows me all of those. Now, it's not going to stop me from doing this. If I want to break my code, that's up to me, although now it won't compile, so even still, the compiler gets the last word here. But it's nice that it gives me this big warning to let me know that I'm about to do something, and then gives me the ability to back out. Okay, so let's open up another project. This will be a WPF application. This is WPF talking to WCF, talking to SQL Server. It's the canonical fat client line of business application, and it does expenses. Okay, so let's just run it quickly to get everything set up. So we've got a WPF app, talking to a WCF service, talking to SQL Server. There's the WCF service starting. Here's the absolutely gorgeous WPF application. There it is. How about that? All right. Just to get that up and running. So now what I want to do is I want to go work with a little bit of the code there. Maybe I'm new to this project, or maybe I'm just trying to familiarize myself with it. So let's take a look at some of the enhancements that have been added to the Solution Navigator, to the Solution Explorer, excuse me. Some of these things actually wound up in 2013. Some of them appeared in an extension called the Productivity Power Tools from a while ago and then made it into the product. So some of this stuff has been in there a while, but I think it's good to remind ourselves that it's in there. So if I open up any of these code files, for example, this one here, okay, just to refresh, notice that each of the files has an icon, and then inside this code file, I'm shown the classes and then the methods as well as properties and what they take. So using the Solution Explorer, I can kind of explore the structure of the code. Okay. And then, of course, if I want to go to one, all I got to do is double click on that and I go directly to it. But let's say I don't know or remember where everything is in this project. This is the solution. I've only got 3 projects in here, but imagine that you've got a solution with multiple projects, with multiple code files in there, and you need to go find a particular method, such as get charges. So I can come into the Solution Explorer, type in the search here, and it will show me all of the get charges. Oh yeah, this is the one I wanted. Get charges for expense report. Is it the one in the interface? Is it the one in the actual code? Is it the one that's in the client? This is the one I wanted. Double click on it and go straight to it. If I right click on this, I can see what this calls, what this is called by, what it's used by, what it implements. And then what I can also do is if I just want to work with this file, I can right click on this and create a new Solution Explorer view, which will, that's probably a bad example, so let's go back. And I just want to work with the WPF project, so I'll right-click on that and choose New Solution Explorer View, which gives me a Solution Explorer that is scoped to that particular project. This is floatable. I can dock it in here. I could move it to a second monitor. Could do whatever I wanted with that. And then, so if I can also, within this Solution Explorer, scope to this, so I can create a second Solution Explorer. I could basically filter in the Solution Explorer to that, and then hit the back button or the forward button to go back and forth. So a lot of things I can do with the Solution Explorer that makes it easier to find code. And I totally forget about that a lot of times. This stuff was introduced in 2013, and here we are late in the 2015 life cycle, and I continue to remind myself that I can do some of those things. Okay, so let's say we want to explore some code. right? So I want to learn how to, I don't know, play with the bot framework or the Office graph, or, making some call. I want to learn how to do something along the lines of security or encryption. We're always learning new things. And the easiest way to learn something new is to just create the simplest UI you can possibly think of and put the code in there. So how many of you, when you do that, create a WinForm project, slap a button on there and put all the code in that? Some of us. How many people do it with a console application? A lot of us. So interestingly, when we look at the types of projects people are creating, it's like the number 1 and 2 projects are console apps, and WinForms apps are right up there sort of at the top. And it's not because the whole world is going back to WinForms, and it's not that the whole world is stuck on WinForms. It's that and console apps are often the easiest way to play around with code. Well, there's a third way now, which is introduced in 2015, and that is the C# interactive window. So if I go to View, and then I got to remember where it is. It's under Other Windows, and then I got to find it in this very long list. It's C# interactive. Then I can call up the C# interactive window, or I can use the quick launch and just type C# inter, and then it takes me right to it. So this quick launch is your friend. So I use this all the time. I want to change the fonts. I don't want to have to remember where fonts are, although I've changed my fonts so often I know how to find them. Tools, Options, under Environment, Fonts. But I can just type font and go directly to there. Or if I want to find out where the Xamarin stuff is, I can't believe this. One of these days we're going to have to add to the project that it knew what I was, read your mind. Right? Computers have this nasty habit of doing exactly what you tell them to do rather than understanding the context. So here I can go straight to the Xamarin tools in the options. I don't have to remember where things are. Okay, that's just an aside. So we're in the C# interactive window. So this is the C# compiler, and I can do, fancy things like 2 plus 2, which is equal to 4, and I can type console, and notice that I'm getting IntelliSense. Console write line, OMG, this is so cool. And if I hit enter there, it gives me a new line, so I got to learn to go to the end and maybe even put that on there. Did that work? Nope. Let's try this again. Console write line, OMG. Okay, let's clear this or reset. Let's do a reset. Let's try this again as I demonstrate my awesome typing skills. Console write line, OMG. There we go. Ta-da! All right. Now, if we look at here, we've got a number of choices in here, one of which is to reset the whole window, clear the contents, go backwards to do things that you've already called, go forwards. Now, obviously, if you're just playing around with this, is that interesting? Well, if you're learning C#, it actually is kind of interesting. There are things on the web. I've seen websites that do the same thing, which is cool. But here you can do it inside Visual Studio. Now, is it just the basics, the basic part of the language features itself? Can you do anything more interesting? You absolutely can. So let's start. I'm going to put this over here so I can easily copy from it. I can do things like usings, so those work. So we're going to write some code to get stock quotes here. I'm going to put in a variable URL which goes out to yahoo.com and pulls back Microsoft stock. Let's change this to something more recent. Let's get the data up through 2016. because we like to see nice high numbers. Okay, and then I can do a little bit of, interactive testing here. What is the URL? Because can I hover over it? Well, I'm told it's a string, but if I want to be able to see what's in it, then I can just do that simple console write line. Now here's a whole bunch of code. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it all in like that. Okay, so now here's my code to call this website and get the results back in a stream reader, and then stick the data in CSV, which is the response. And now if I look at length, I can see that this is the length of that. I can do that, split it up and find the length of the most recent one. I can do substrings. Okay, so now I'm seeing some information. What I can also do is some link queries, because this is a bunch of data in here. So what did I do? Oh, I'm missing the V. Thank you. So I'm going to have to go back up and put the V in. Okay, so there were 229 instances when the stock was over 50, which is why I set the date to 2016, because the original version of this, when it's a year ago, there were only like 20 of them. I like it when there's more. Okay, so we can do link queries, so we can actually do entire programs, which is a lot cooler than necessarily creating console application 47 just to test pieces of code, right? And of course, I can take this code now and save it into my program. I can take this code and I can copy it and I can save it into text files or whatever. All right, so what else can we do here? We, at the moment, cannot add NuGet packages, although there's a good chance that will show up in the next version either right away or sometime in an update. We're working on the ability to add NuGet packages, but what we do have is the ability to add references. So let's go to some code, my amazing calculator. I worked on this for literally a number of minutes. And let me show you this. Have you ever in your life seen such elegant code? I mean, really. So here's my amazing calculator, and it's built, and it is, right, it's in here somewhere. It's in the bin, probably in the debug. There it is. So now what I can do is come back into the C# interactive window and set a reference to that. Not using the add references dialog, but using #R and then the very long location to it. So you don't get the ability to, a UI to search for it, but it is now referenced inside here. I can create a new instance of it, and I can call that amazing calculator, which always returns the correct result. It's very cool. Yes, quick question. Having a hard time hearing that, sorry. The difference between this one and the immediate window. I think the immediate window is really designed more to work with the contents at a period in time. This one is essentially a code editor. You can think of it that way. So you're able to add multiple lines of code to a program and then essentially execute that program. I think that's winds up being a primary difference. Yes? Do you have to have a project open? What an excellent question. Let's see. Nope. Not only do you not have to have a project open, but you don't even have to have Visual Studio open. So if we come out here, go to All Apps, come down to Visual Studio, and where is it? Probably under V. Visual Studio 2015, wrong one. I want the developer command prompt. Developer command prompt for Visual Studio 2015. There it is. And I now type CSI. I am now in the C# Interactive, and I don't need to be inside Visual Studio. Of course, at this point, probably don't get IntelliSense, I don't get syntax coloring, but I don't literally need Visual Studio to do that. Okay, I don't need you. So that's the C# interactive window. Very, very cool way for trying out new things without having to, like I say, constantly create multiple versions of a console app or a WinForm application or anything else you might do just to play around with code. Okay, so let's go back to this WPF application. I want to do some code analysis on this. Now, we've always had the ability to build, run code analysis on the solution, which will compile it and do a little FX copying around in it, and hopefully teach me some things about my code. I find exactly 6 things. There's a call that results in a call chain that results in a call to a virtual method defined by the class. I'm not really sure what that means, but if I look at the code, I see that this is a hyperlink. So I can click on that and go to the documentation on that out on MSDN, and I can read a little bit more about that. So do not call overridable methods in constructors. So I can learn some things like that. But one of the things that Roslyn gives you the ability to do is write your own code analyzers. Okay? And we're expecting, some of them we've written ourselves in the product, but it's also open, and we expect other people to write code analyzers that you could use. And in a code analyzer, you basically define a set of rules that you're going to be looking out for. So there's a number of examples of these, and one that I want to focus on is called Code Cracker. So for the WPF project, I'm going to right-click on that, manage NuGet packages, and I'm going to browse for Code Cracker. Code Cracker. There it is. There's a version for VB. There's a version for C#. Written by these guys. It's an analyzer that uses Roslyn to produce refactorings, code analysis, and other niceties. Sounds good to me. I will install that into my WPF project. I accept. Okay, it's in. I assume it's in. Okay, so now, if I go into the Solution Explorer and I look under References, notice that there's Analyzers, and it now has an arrow there. If I expand that, I can see codecracker.common and codecracker.c#. And if I expand that, it's going to tell me all the things that this is going to be looking for, like you should use var whenever possible, invalid argument name, use for each, your throw does nothing, use name of, use switch. So this sounds pretty interesting. There are a bunch of things in there that I wouldn't mind being reminded of, gently reminded of, as I write code and as I build my project. So if we now look in the error list, 8 warnings, 14 messages. Let's build this, because sometimes these things show up right away. Sometimes I think you actually have to build. So now if I go here, there we go. Now I get them all. 35 warnings, including a number of use var instead of specifying the type name. So if I double click on that, then I can see right here, even though whoever wrote this code used var up above here, they didn't use var down there. And then this thing is telling me. I get a green squiggly, and I get the light bulb that shows up to remind me that I should use var. Now, that's a convenience at design time. That's not going to affect the code at runtime, of course, but it's less typing, and we might decide that this is something we want to standardize on. We also might decide that it's something we want to force ourselves to remember. So if I come here and right-click on this, I can set the rule severity. It can be hidden, it can be informational, it can be a warning, it can be an error. So I've decided that I once and for all am going to teach myself to learn var, and I'm going to set that to an error. And now notice that I get a red squiggly and my code won't build. Right? That'd be a cool April Fool's joke, wouldn't it? Something trick to play on your unsuspecting colleagues. I'm sorry? Yes. Can you do all at once? I don't believe so, and it's also only at the project level, and it's only for that project because it's a NuGet package. It would be cool to ultimately elevate that to the Visual Studio level, and there is some work being done in the next version of Visual Studio where you can set your own types of rules like this. So setting it at the actual product level is something that will show up in the next version of the product. So I probably, I don't know, I think setting this as an error is pretty harsh. So I'm going to set it back as a warning, but I might just want it to be informational because I don't know that I even want to see the green squiggly. If I set it to info, the green squiggly goes away. So I can decide what type of help I want here. And now if I hover over it, I don't get a light bulb because it's only informational. I won't see it until I go to the error list. And now there's 18 messages. Right? This is no longer a warning. Now it's a message, informational. Okay? So there's a bunch of these code analyzers out there. CodeCracker is a really good one. There's other ones as well that take advantage of, of the new compiler to be watching as you type. So let's set this back to a warning. And now, if I do this, I type main window. It's already... No, it's not. So I type main window 2 equals new main window. Oops. Okay, so at that point, it's given me the green squiggly. So as I'm typing, it's keeping track. So that's kind of pretty cool. All right. What else do we got? Code snippets. Who here uses code snippets? Who here would use code snippets if they were easier to write? Who here wishes it was easier to write your own snippets? Yes, exactly. Okay, so there are tools, there are extensions and third-party tools for writing code snippets, but it turns out that they're just XML files and you could actually write them yourself. So I'm going to add here a new, not a project. I clicked the wrong thing. What some people do is they add a folder. I've seen this done before. Let's add a solution folder. Call it snippets. And then we're going to add a new item to this. And code snippets are XML files, so I'm going to call this XML file, and I'm going to call it employee ID snippet. Okay? Is that what I want to call it? Yeah. Oh, I want to call it emp ID prop. Emp ID prop. And the thing is, I write a lot of code, especially in this application, a lot of classes that have an employee ID. And I'm constantly having to write the employee ID. Employee ID. That's not going to work. All right, so here, under charge, for example, in the models, constantly doing an employee ID, or if I look in the model, and I'm constantly having to create this property over and over and over again. There's also one down in my view models, where here's the code to do an employee ID, and I'm actually kind of tired of having to do this over and over and over again. Right? I create this application in the employee has an employee ID, charges have an employee ID, reports have an employee ID, everybody's got an employee ID. I'm tired of having to write this code over and over again. I want to make a snippet out of it. right-click, create code snippet is not in the product, unfortunately. So I want to make a snippet out of this. And I've got an XML file here, but what does the XML for a snippet look like? Well, we can go to the Code Snippet Manager and go find the C# code snippets. They are in this folder here. So let's go out to that. And here's a bunch of snippets. Let's just pick any one of them. Open with, I like Notepad. And should probably increase the font so we can have half a chance of reading that. There. So it's code snippets. There's a namespace, code snippet format. There's a header which includes the title, the shortcut, the description, the author, the type of snippet, and then that's all in the header. Then snippet, declarations, and the actual code is in this C data. So this winds up being the code that I want added, including the substitutions in there. Okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to put it in here. All right? And I don't actually have any code literals in here. I don't have any substitutions. And I'm going to give this a title of emp ID prop and a shortcut of emp ID prop. Probably should give it a better title. Employee ID property. All right? And the description is employee ID property. And then I'm going to go get the code, which is all of this. And I'm going to copy it inside the C data, like that, and save that. Where's save? There it is. I'm going blind in my old age. Okay, so now I should be able to come into, theoretically, be able to come into the Code Snippet Manager and add this. There is a category here called My Code Snippets. So I'm going to add, and I'm going to come find this snippet, which is expenses. Where'd it go? This is harder than it should be. I totally agree with you. Where did I put? Right-click, make snippet would be easier. I agree. All right, so let's do this. This is definitely harder than it should be. Sorry? Isn't there a way if I write? Open folder in File Explorer. There it is. There's the snippet right there. Okay, so if I copy this, I can leave it there, or what I could also do is pick it up and put it in the place that Visual Studio is expecting to find it in, which is snippets. Hold on a sec. Tools. I'm making it harder than it really is. My Code Snippets, which is this folder here. There, and then I come over here, grab this, copy it, paste it into here. Then if I come back into the Code Snippet Manager, it should find it, which it does, employee ID property. So now, theoretically, I should be able to create a class here, call it employee. It already exists. All right, how about we call it employee 2? How about we call it X-employee? And now, if I call up my code, I should be able to say emp ID prop. Nope. If I right-click, insert snippet, what happened? Where are my snippets? Oh, there it is, staring me in the face. C#. It's not showing up. Oh, well. This was a great demo every time it worked. Anyway, that's the general idea. So yes, it's a little bit harder than you'd like it to be, but it's doable. And once you understand the format of the XMLs, then it can be pretty quick just to take code, put it into that boilerplate, the snippet boilerplate, and make your own snippets. And I made some silly mistake. If you follow the demo script a little bit more closely, which I didn't do, then it should work. Okay. Let's take a quick look at debugging. How are we doing on time? Is this an hour and 15? Just an hour? Hour 15? Good. All right. Okay, so let's take a little look at, let me close all these. Let's take a little look at some performance. So I'm going to put a couple breakpoints in here. I'm going to put a breakpoint on get employee async, which I don't necessarily remember where it is. So again, I'm going to use the searching here. There it is, get employee async, which takes the employee alias and then goes and finds the employee calling the service. And I'm going to put a breakpoint right, let's say, here. Okay? And then I also want one in show charges, because what this application does when you launch it, it shows your outstanding charges and then gives you the ability to create expense reports. So I'll put a couple breakpoints in here, and now let's run this. So the users have been telling me that the application takes a little bit too long to load up, and I want to try and figure out why that might be. Okay, so the first thing we see, I want to try to get a sense of how long this is taking, so I'm going to step over it. Step over it. Come back in here. And if we zoom in on that, notice right here, it's telling me that it took 6.315 milliseconds. So it turns out that to go initialize the employee is taking 6 seconds. So I've now just determined why the application takes that long to start up. Okay? It's probably network latency, but at least I have the ability now to drill down on this. We call these things perf tips. And if I double click on that, then I can go into the diagnostic tools, and I can see things like memory usage and events and CPU usage. Usually get a little bit more information here. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing the rest of it. Huh. There's usually more information that shows up. Okay, so the cool thing about the perf tip is that it tells you how long this particular code took to run. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go in here, and what we do is we go and retrieve a bunch of charges, your outstanding charges, and then put those into this outstanding charges, which is an observable collection. And I want to see what charges have come back. So if I hover over charges, it gives me this tip here, which tells me a little bit of information. If I click on this without losing the focus of it, I can then see that there's a result and there's 4 of them. If I go there, I see that there's 4 of them. I can click on that, and I can kind of start looking at these, but that's really a pain, right? So in this case, how many of us have then, in our code, written a bunch of link statements to explore the data? All right. How many of us have forgotten to take that code out and put it into production? Don't raise your hand. Don't admit it. I'll admit it. I do stuff like that, right? Wouldn't it be cool if I could do these types of queries real time? So I want to say something like charges.result in the immediate window. There it is. Okay, there's 4 of them. Or I might want to say charges.result.count. There's 4 of them. Or I might want to say something like charges.result.select. Charges.result.select. Oh, I don't know, something like, what are the descriptions? Oh, cool. What are the build amounts? Oh, cool. Let's see, how many times how many of these have a build amount of greater than 100? So charges.result, where, that's supposed to be one of these things, c.build amount greater than 100. Count. One of them, okay. Maybe I was expecting more than one. Or I want to see a little bit more information on that. Charges.result.where. I'm going to copy this. So for the ones that were less than 100, or no, let's stick to the ones that are greater than 100. I want to see more information on those. .select, see new, and what I want to see is the merchant and the description. So I can do link queries in the immediate window in real time and not have to worry about having to put that code into my code and rerunning the application to get to that point so I can investigate the results that have come back in a collection. Okay, cool. All right, so there's a bunch of other demos in here, but I want to make sure that we get to all the cool stuff. So I'm going to now jump ahead to some of the language enhancements. And if there's time, then we'll come back and do some additional things. So let's look at some of the new features in C# 6.0. And I have a couple classes here. Starting point, which is perfectly valid C# code, does a bunch of things. And then point is showing us additional things we can do. So let's bump this up a little bit to make it easier for you guys to see. Okay. So anything that's commented out is typically the old way of doing it. So we want to be able to have getter-only auto properties, which we didn't have before. Now we have those. So I don't have to type the set just to never use it. And we can initialize these at the same time. Okay? Then I have this point class. We have this thing called string interpolation. So how many people have written code that looks like this? Return string.format, right? Of course. Is that particularly difficult to do? Well, it actually can be, because you've got a lot of brackets and 0, 1, 2, and then you got to make sure that the things you're putting in there line up, right? So it can get kind of messy. We now have string interpolation, so now we can just say $ x is, and then put the x and the y values directly in there. We don't have to type string.format. We don't need all the placeholders. We just, inside the bracket, put the variable right in there, preface it with a $, save a bunch of typing. Okay. I said I wasn't going to pause for effect, and then I just did. What a liar I am, it turns out. Now, this code 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code just to do a return. I got to do the brackets. That's an awful lot of code. We now have something called expression bodies on method-like members. So I can do this in a single line of code. ToString. I should probably comment out the other one since I don't need this code anymore. All right. So ToString, I can just say, the equal arrow sign and put the remainder in there, reduce this to a single line of code. Now, if you're paid by the line of code, you hate this feature. If you're tired of doing all that typing, that's pretty cool. If you're paid by the line of code, get a new job. Or better yet, get that job. All right, we can all do the same thing on members, properties. So here's double. This dist is a double, and it just returns math.square root. We can change that to just be a single line of code as well. And I don't know if you can see that, but the math is grayed out, and it says name can be simplified. And it can be simplified because we now have the ability to add usings to static classes. So I say using static system.math, and I don't need the word math there anymore. I can just reduce this to, like every other class that's in a namespace that I referenced, just reduce it to square root. And of course, the tooltip will always tell me that this is math.square root, not to be confused with any other square root. Okay? All right, I'm going to create this JObject to JSON, which is a JObject of this method here. I'm going to create a new JObject, and then I'm going to initialize x to x and y to y and return the result. And again, that's open bracket, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 6 lines of code that I can reduce, or 7 lines of code that I can reduce to a single line of code, because not only can I initialize this index, but then because all this thing does is return the result, I can take all of that code and get it down to only this. Okay? So the cool thing is the index initializers, and then realizing that all of this is basically just a single line of code. Okay? Here's another classic example. So this method from JSON takes a JObject. First, we check to see if the JObject is null. If it's not, then we check to see if JSON of x is null. If it's not, then we check to see if its type is integer. Then we check to see if JSON of y is not null. And if it's not, then we check to see if its type is integer, because then if it is, we create a new point. So this is checking for null, and this is checking for null, and this is checking for null. And we can use the null operator, the null conditional operator, which is also lovingly referred to as the Elvis operator, because if you take a look at that, it reminds a lot of people of Elvis. Right? Do you see that? I don't know. I kind of don't, but I understand. I think it might be that this just looks like a long sideburn. But we're in Vegas, so we'll go with it. Okay, so all I have to do is say JSON question mark, and that is the same thing as this if it's not null. And then I just of x question mark dot type, and then because I'm overly redundant, I ask again the same question, which I already asked, which I guess I don't really need to do. That probably is a little bit more efficient. Check to see if the type of JSON of y is not null. So I don't have to explicitly type out all of this. I just use the null conditional operator, and it does the job for me, and that reduces that code. Okay? All right, so let's go back up here. So now what I do is I decide I want to rename this variable JSON, and I'm going to change it to Freddie. All right? I have now potentially wasted days of my life because I'm expecting my code to throw an argument exception of Freddie, and it never will. It will always throw an exception of JSON because I didn't change that. I renamed the variable, but I neglected to change this. Think of the hours and days of debugging that you're going to go through, and then you're eventually going to realize that you're still throwing argument null exception of JSON, which is why we invented the name of operator. And now, if I change this to Freddy, my code will work just perfectly. Okay? All right, and then the last thing to show here is awaits. I'm going to go back to the starting point. So here's the code. We're going to call a website. We're going to call some web API. And then if it's Thursday and an exception occurs, we want to log this, right? Because we're interested in things that happen on Thursday. I don't do the specs. I just write the code. So on Thursdays, if this type of exception occurred, we're going to log it this way. Otherwise, we're going to do the generic logging. And even though we're going to call the service asynchronously, we are not allowed to do the logging asynchronously because you can't have async in your catch and you can't have async in your finally. And we always have to trap for this exception and then see if it's Thursday. Well, now, in C#6, there's a couple things I can do. First, I can catch this when it's Thursday. So I'm not going to take the time to catch the exception and then 6 days of the week not do anything with it. And I can also have asynchronous methods in my catch and in my finally. Okay. So there's some pretty cool things that I want to remind myself I should do. Learn these C# features. Wouldn't it be nice if Visual Studio would help me in this regard? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an extension. This actually is at the Visual Studio level. And this extension was written by Dustin Campbell, who's on the C# team, or was at the time. I think he might be in something else now. He's still at Microsoft. So what I'm going to do is look for C# Essentials. And I'm going to install this. I actually have it installed already. I just disabled it for the purposes of this demo. So let me enable it. It requires me to restart Visual Studio. And now this extension, which is taking advantage of Roslyn, is going to be watching me as I write code, and it's going to be suggesting to me time to time when I should use new features that are in C#6. Okay, that's the wrong project. That's fine. So let's open up the new features project. And let's go to point, which was the original, starting point, which was the original code. And we have this extension in here. And so we might need to build. Oh, what happened? How did I manage to mess this up? Where is it? Point. What? Hold on. Boy, I'm not sure. What am I missing? Okay. Oh, I see. Yes. And I accidentally deleted that. Okay, cool. Not sure when I did that, but clearly I did. Okay, so now if we go back to starting point, notice when I hover over this, it's going to tell me name can be simplified. And if I show the potential fixes, one of them is to use an expression-bodied member, and when I change that, where'd it go? Then okay, so in that case, it told me to use the expression-bodied member. If I highlight this whole string format and press Control dot, will it tell me? Convert to interpolated string. So in that case, if I remember that there's a replacement for string.format, I can highlight that whole thing, press Control dot, and it will change it to the $ for me. So this C# Essentials extension will do some watching of my code and do some reminding me that I should update to some of the new language features. So you can take a look at that. There's probably other ones out there to remind you to use these things. So how are we doing on time? Are we over? We are over. So this really was an hour long. All right, you got a bonus 10 minutes. Okay, so in that case, since we're over, hopefully you found that interesting. Hopefully you learned about who learned some things that they will now get to take home. Excellent. Cool. Thank you very much. Hope you had a wonderful show. Hope to see you next time, whether it's in the spring or next time here in the fall. Thanks so much.